The moment she stepped onto the plane, the excitement surged through her veins. First class. She had dreamt of this for years, picturing herself in that luxurious seat, staring out the window as the world beneath her seemed so small. But as she reached her assigned seat, the flight attendant stopped her with an almost apologetic yet firm expression. "I'm sorry, ma'am, this seat isn't for you," she said, pointing to a seat in economy. Confusion bubbled within her, her heart racing. "But this is my seat. See the ticket?" She handed it over, but the attendant didn't even glance at it. "You'll have to take another seat." The murmurs of nearby passengers filled the air, some questioning, some silently judging. As the flight attendant turned away, she stood there, frozen, unable to process what was happening. Was there a mistake? Or something deeper? Something she wasn't seeing? The uncertainty gnawed at her. Sitting in the cramped economy seat, her mind raced, and a sense of humiliation settled deep within her chest. She had always imagined flying first class would feel different, like a reward for everything she'd worked for. But now it felt like she had been stripped of that dream. Every minute that passed made the ache in her chest grow, her thoughts clouded with confusion. Why? She kept asking herself, over and over, like a broken record. Her gaze shifted to the first-class cabin where passengers were settling comfortably in their plush seats, laughing and chatting as if nothing was wrong. Her heart sank further. How had this happened? She looked down at the ticket again, hoping for an answer, but the paper felt cold and foreign in her hands. The reality of being treated differently, of being overlooked, was sinking in, and she couldn't help but feel small, unimportant. As the flight attendant made her rounds, her eyes avoided the girl's gaze, a strange tension hanging between them. The girl's stomach twisted as she watched the woman's nervous movements, the way her hands trembled slightly as she handed out drinks. Something wasn't right. The attendant's eyes darted toward her seat, then quickly away like she was hiding something. The girl's instincts kicked in. There was more to this than just a seating mistake. When the attendant reached her, she hesitated, then leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, it's not my decision. I was told to make sure you stay here." The words hit her like a punch in the gut, leaving her speechless. Her mind raced. Who told her? Why was she being treated this way? The girl's heart pounded, the weight of this unspoken secret pressing down on her. She needed answers before it was too late. Her mind buzzed with confusion as she sat in the economy seat, the weight of the flight attendant's words hanging over her like a dark cloud. "It's not my decision." What did that even mean? She thought of her father, his promises, his power, his constant words of reassurance. "You're my legacy," he would say, as if the world owed her something because of who he was. But in this moment, it felt like nothing mattered. Her seat, her place on the plane, had been stolen from her. She pulled out her phone, fingers trembling, and typed his name in the search bar. Her heart skipped a beat when the familiar articles about him owning the airline appeared on the screen. Could it be possible? Her father, the man who built an empire, had his own airline, but his own daughter was being treated like this. The weight of her thoughts pressed harder, but deep down something stirred. A flicker of hope. Her mind raced, heart pounding, as the pieces started to fit together. Could it really be? She couldn't sit still, the burning need for answers consuming her. The flight attendant passed by again, her face pale, avoiding eye contact. Without thinking, the girl stood up, a mix of anger and desperation flooding her veins. "Why am I being treated like this?" she demanded, voice shaking. The attendant froze, then looked around nervously, her lips parting as if she was about to speak, but the words stuck. Finally, with a deep breath, she spoke in a hushed tone. "I was told by higher-ups, it's because, well, because your father owns the airline." The words hit like a bomb, detonating everything inside her. The world seemed to spin, the floor beneath her feet unsteady. Her father. She couldn't believe it. Her own flesh and blood. And yet, she was still just another passenger. How could he allow this? The revelation felt like a slap in the face, the sting of betrayal cutting deep. Her father, the man who had always told her she could have anything, who had promised her the world, how could he let this happen? Her hands were shaking as she stormed toward the cockpit, her heart hammering with every step. The captain, an older man with tired eyes, greeted her stiffly, sensing the tension in the air. She could feel his unease, the silence hanging thick. "What's going on?" she demanded, voice steady but sharp, her frustration boiling over. The captain shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. "We were instructed, miss," he said, his voice low. "It's complicated." She could see the fear in his eyes. He was trapped. Her mind reeled, the anger twisting inside her, but there was a cold clarity now. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. She stared at him, refusing to back down. "I want answers now." Her phone buzzed, the familiar ringtone piercing the heavy silence that had settled in the cockpit. Without thinking, she answered, her father's name lighting up the screen. The weight of everything that had just happened crashed down on her, but she still found herself searching for some comfort in his voice. "Dad?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What's going on? Why did they do this to me?" On the other end, her father's voice was calm, almost too calm. "I've been informed about the situation and it's being taken care of." The words felt hollow, a quick reassurance that didn't land right. His tone had changed. Was it guilt? She could feel the distance between them growing, like a wall had suddenly gone up. "It won't happen again," he promised. But her mind couldn't let go of the feeling that something was still wrong. Why did it take so long for him to act? The phone call ended, but the unease didn't leave her. Her father's words echoed in her mind, but they felt distant, disconnected from the reality she had just faced. As the plane soared through the skies, her heart felt heavy, weighed down by a new understanding. She wasn't just the daughter of a powerful man, she was still treated like everyone else, sometimes less. Her seat in economy wasn't just a mistake, it was a reflection of something deeper, something she hadn't wanted to admit. Even with all her father's wealth, his influence, she wasn't exempt from being overlooked, from being made to feel insignificant. The thought stung more than she expected. She wanted to believe she could navigate the world with the privilege she'd been given, but the harsh truth was different. Was her father's legacy really hers, or just a facade built on someone else's terms? The weight of the question hung in the air, suffocating her. The flight was nearing its destination, and her mind still swirled with unanswered questions. The anger inside her had transformed into something more dangerous: disillusionment. She stared out the window, watching the clouds below, feeling like a stranger to her own life. Is this what my father's world really was? But as the plane began its descent, something unexpected happened. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom. "We apologize for the earlier confusion and we'd like to rectify the situation." Her heart skipped a beat. The attendants began to move quickly, an unusual shift in their demeanor. Moments later, they arrived at her seat, escorting her to the first-class cabin. As they led her forward, she caught the glint of recognition in the eyes of a few passengers, some puzzled, others curious. She wasn't sure what had changed or why, but for the first time all day she felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't over yet. As she settled into the plush first-class seat, the weight of the past hours lingered like a shadow. The luxury around her felt hollow now, as if it couldn't fill the empty space inside. She glanced at the passengers who exchanged glances, clearly aware of what had just happened. Was this what she had wanted? The comfort, the status, it all seemed so irrelevant now. Her father's wealth, his name, it wasn't enough to shield her from feeling like an outsider. The flight attendants continued their rounds, but this time, the girl's gaze was steady, no longer seeking approval. She had learned a painful truth. Her place in the world wasn't defined by her father's legacy, but by her own actions, her own sense of self-worth. As the plane landed, she made a promise to herself she would no longer let anyone define her. She would find her own voice. What about you? Will you find yours?